What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Mullins Muster Podcast, where we talk about all things leadership and we talk about it with industry-leading experts. As always, if we're adding value to you, your life, your family, your organizations, please let us know. Do us a favor, leave a rating and review wherever you listen to the podcast. If you'd like to watch the podcast, you can do so on the Humble Leader Development YouTube page. This episode is brought to you by the fine people at Humble Leader Development. Humble Leader Development is a leadership organization that strives to make people and organizations better through speaking, training, and consultation. If you want to find out more about Humble Leader Development, check them out at humbleleaderdevelopment.com. Holy cow, it's been a whole year since we released our first episode of the podcast. It has been a crazy and awesome year, and we're excited about where the podcast continues to go. We thank you so much for all the listeners that have been supporting us over the course of the last year. It has been truly amazing to watch and to see you guys come on board into our podcast family. Since it's been a year since we started the podcast, and this month marks our 1-year anniversary, we thought it was appropriate to do a best of episode just to celebrate our first year because it was so great. We had some awesome guests. We had some great teachings. The community engaged us on a lot of stuff. Again, we thank you for that. So without further ado, we're going to dive right in to a few of our best ofs throughout the year. Our first episode ever started with a lesson from me on the power of thank you. And here's just a quick highlight from that episode. We spend so much time at work, and it's the least thankful part of our lives. Half of us say thank you on a regular basis to somebody that we're related to. Half of us still give thanks to those that we live in the same house with. But only 15% of us ever say thank you at work. And 35% of us say that they have never, ever been thanked for anything at work. And that's a mind-boggling statistic. There was a great conversation back in the 60s and 70s between two legendary college basketball coaches, Dean Smith and John Wooden, and they talked about how important it was to thank teammates and to make sure everyone felt like they were part of the team. If you watch basketball at all now, you see this really at all levels. For the most part, from high school up, even into the pros, people point at each other. So if somebody gives you a good pass and you're able to score off that pass, you point to the passer to tell him thank you. And Dean Smith was so adamant about pointing to the passer to ensure that he knew that he was valued and that he knew he was a part of the team. If they did not point to the passer and make sure that they knew they were appreciative of that pass so they could score, Dean Smith put them on the line and they ran wind sprints. It was that important because, the one who made the assist, who gave the pass, he doesn't get credit for the points. He didn't score the basket. He didn't make the incredible alley-oop dunk. But he made that score possible. And everybody on the team contributes. And that's why it was so important for these two coaches to ensure their players recognize each other for a job well done. The first guest we ever had on the podcast was Kyle Creighton, who is a co-owner of Creighton Custom Contracting. And he's been a part of a family-run business for over 60 years. His grandfather ran it, his dad runs it, now he helps his father run it. And it's an awesome family organization to be a part of. And he kind of took us on a little journey of what it's like to be in the construction industry and how they have to adapt, especially during tough, difficult times like a recession. So there's been over 60-some years, there's huge ups and downs, swings in the economy. Yeah. How have you guys been able to adapt to stay relevant during those times? I mean, you said yourself, a lot of good builders went under from that. So what were some of the things that you guys did to be able to ride that storm?
Well, you asked if there were things that Grandpa had said or are things that we just done our whole life throughout the company. But Grandpa always said, and Dad will say it too, is like you have to know your worth, and then you also need to know when to cut your costs to feed your family, because you can sit at home and make nothing, but then again you have to get bills paid. So you take on a different mindset in a recession. Kind of like right now, people are building just hand over fist. They really are. Mm-hmm. They're trying to take advantage of what's left of the interest rates. I don't know how they are with the lumber prices. They are, honestly, but they are. When the recession and things dry up, that's when a lot of remodels become focus, because they're less costly, but people still need more room. You have kids, you have different seasons in your life, and you need different things out of your house. So remodels, additions, and things like that, they become a lot more prominent because they're less costly and they don't require you to basically give up a year of your life. But yeah, you really take just jobs like that, kitchen remodels, whatever you can. Really. I mean, honestly, we've built dog houses. They were nice dog houses, but we built dog houses. They were bigger, but yeah, they come out there with some real nice 3/4 plywood. I want to frame it like a house. Whatever you want, man. Yeah. I'll build it. It'll get done. But you just learn not to turn things down like that.
We had the privilege of having the lead pastor from the Church of 1122 on the podcast, Joby Martin. Like I said, he's the lead pastor down at the church in Jacksonville, and they continue to expand. And some consider them to be one of the fastest growing churches in the country. And he was gracious enough to give us about a half hour of his time. And during this part of the interview, he talked about his quote unquote guardian angel, his wife, and how she continued to encourage him when he ran into self-doubt.
As I was reading through it, one of the first things that you talked about was some self-doubt at times. And I think we all struggle with self-doubt, no matter what kind of positions or what you're going through in life. Everybody struggles with that. And you actually talked about how you thought about at one time leaving the ministry and taking just a secular job and trying to get after something different because you thought you were going to provide a life that your wife, that you thought that she wanted, and that a life that you thought maybe your kids wanted. But you were able to overcome that and stay where you were. How did you come to that conclusion? How did you finally figure out that, no, man, this is where God's supposed to have me. This is what I'm supposed to be doing, and go from there?
Yeah, man, I give really my wife the credit. I had been doing ministry for probably about, I don't know, a little shy of 10, I may have been about 10 years at that point. And we had just got married and went to a church that was just a really bad fit. Honestly, that church had gotten into on the wrong side of a denominational battle a long time before that. And a bunch of the folks in that church had just moved away from the sufficiency of scripture. And I'm a Bible guy, and it was just a bad fit in that church. And I began to think, well, maybe I don't have what it takes to do ministry. Maybe it was a good season, led a bunch of kids to Christ. And right at that time, I had 2 other offers to do other things. And at that time, the money they were offering me was crazy, right? And so, I don't know, it just seemed, based on the environment, it seemed like maybe that was what was going to be next for me. And as I think back, man, if you look at like when Elijah comes off the mountain of Carmel, and he's just had a huge ministry success, right? Defeated 850 prophets. And then the very next page of the Bible, he's laying by a brook, asking God to kill him. Now, I wasn't suicidal or anything like that, but I felt kind of, even though I'd had a bunch of success, if you'd call it that, in ministry, I just had a lot of self-doubt. And God sent Elijah an angel, man. And mine just happened to be my wife. And she encouraged me, and she was like, I think you should just give it one more chance, because maybe this is just a bad fit. And so this was back in the day of answering machines. And so she put my resume on a youth specialties like job board. And I took a bunch of kids to camp. And when I got back, there was a bunch of calls from a bunch of churches. And so I decided to just give it one more chance. And that's how we ended up in Jacksonville. And I went to work at Beach United Methodist Church. And that's the church that we launched 1122 out of. So she was right.
Next on the interview docket was the CEO of Warrior Pack Battery Systems, Laura Thale. And she gave us a glimpse into overcoming a lot of adversity from going to Cloud 9 to the basement, basically overnight, due to a safety issue, and how they were able to overcome it and now be better for it.
You guys hit a point where you were humming.
Yeah.
I mean, you were putting out some batteries. You had orders coming in, extremely high demand.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about Cloud 9, you guys were on it.
Yeah. We were doubling our sales every year. It was
Yeah,
awesome.
I mean, just absolute records. And then you had an incident.
Fires. Yep.
And then some batteries that got wet ended up starting fires.
Right.
And a safety message was put out and said that you can no longer purchase your batteries.
Right. I know.
And so overnight, pretty
Yeah.
much, you
Yeah.
guys went from just
Flying high.
unstoppable, doubling sales, just crushing every bit of it. To
Yeah.
now you're down in the basement. I mean, you're scraping the bottom of the barrel just trying to get by.
Right.
What was that roller coaster like?
Well, yeah, by the time that one happened, we had been through 3 previous fires. So there were those 2 fires close together that you're talking about, but we'd been through earlier fires. So we weren't completely flummoxed by the fact that there were fires. This is a thing that happens with lithium batteries. It particularly happens with lithium batteries, as we now really understand. If you get them wet, plug them into a wall charger, and then plug them into AC power. If you try to recharge a wet battery, you've got a pretty good chance of catching the plastic on fire around it. And then if you're not lucky, the battery will catch on fire too. In some instances, the packs caught on fire. The last fire, though, gave us a huge hint, and that was because the cells were intact. The cells had not started the fire. So we had a big hint. So we weren't all that upset about it. And yes, we got banned, but we figured once we explained what we'd learned that would reverse itself, but it just didn't. And then with one group of service members, the people that instituted the ban left, and the new people didn't know what had happened. So no one could undo it. It was like no one knew what had happened and didn't want to try to undo something they didn't understand, and that there was no way to get it accounted for. So that was a tricky part. But in the meantime, so what did we do? So when you have a big setback like that, my instinct is to fall back and go to where I have some certainty, go back to where I started, basically. And for us, that meant going back to the STSs and finishing the design of the Freedom Pack and selling that to them. And they bought it. So that's how we're still here. They bought the Freedom Packs for the whole STS group. And that meant that we continued to go out and train. We had money for paying the bills. And in the meantime, we hired Sean Mignon to be our first outside sales rep. And because of his broad knowledge of the TACP community, and because time had gone by, and because we could talk about it, and because the STS has never stopped using our stuff, and because we just didn't give up. It would have been easy to give up. At one point in around 2014, we moved into my garage here at the house. We had the assembly techs in the downstairs in the garage part, and everybody else was upstairs in the apartment. We had all these cars out here in my driveway, and that lasted for about 4 months until my neighbors complained. So anyway, that didn't really last, and we ended up in new spaces, and you've seen one of the new spaces we ended up in. Money got tight. I ended up paying payroll out of my checking account for a while, for a year.
Wow. That's crazy within itself, but I think that speaks volumes of how much you just love and care for your employees.
Yeah.
And how much you believe in them, and you believed in the mission. You guys were able to make some shifts. You redesigned some things to help prevent some of the water getting in, and
That's right.
and it was great that you continue to push the man portable batteries, but you added a new product line. You're like, all right,
Right.
well, this one has no issues, and here's all the reasons why, and that kept you in the game
Yeah.
until you could overcome the hurdles
Right.
for the actual man portable batteries. That's just an awesome lesson.
Rob Olson is an innovation science genius. He's been in the innovation world for over 35 years, logging over 35 years just at Procter & Gamble alone. He and I became friends through a course that he was instructing and I was a student of, and he was gracious enough to be a guest on the podcast and talk to us about how to win a bar fight, how to get those sponsors that you need to get innovation across the goal line.
Innovation is the adoption of a useful new thing by a group of humans. Okay. So now we're getting into the science of who the heck are these humans? And how do we influence them to adopt the better thing? First of all, you better make sure that the better thing's really better. That's step one. But having reasonable evidence that your thing is actually better, who are all these stakeholders? And so they're the model of sponsors, the people who literally can give you money, time, resources, people, advocacy that you need to take the next step. I need to build a pilot line and produce widget X. I need to get this block of the company to adopt this new process. Again, innovation isn't limited to widgets. It could be process, it could be community, any of those things. Okay, so the sponsors are the people who can say yes. Then there's the advocates. Those are people that might be high up also, like your sponsor would have some authority, your advocates. They'll go, it's actually that's not my part of the Air Force. That's not my part of the company. But boy, I'd love it if that happened. So I'm on your side. How can I help you? Except I can't give you the time, money, people. I can't say yes to your thing, but I can talk to people. I can influence them. Okay, so you definitely want advocates. Okay. Then there's the agents. Well, we're the agents of change, but there are other agents of change. So you want to make sure your thing isn't conflicting with some other agents of change, right? So that's another person you got to go understand. And then there are the little lower left-hand block on that model, if you remember right, is the associates, right? If we make this change, these people have to do something different than they do today. For me at P&G, one of my crucial associates was when I introduced a new product design, a whole bunch of people on a whole bunch of production lines all around the globe suddenly have to do something different. So I had to go to those plants. I had to understand what those different things were. And I had to make sure that my change was not only good for the end user, the consumer, but it could be produced with quality in the plant. And so all of those are really important. So those are some of the blocks of people you're serving. And again, if in a pure design thinking model, for example, you might just spend time with the end user, right? But if it's not a win for these other people, guess what? It ain't happening. Okay. So that's that. Now, when you go down and list those stakeholders by name, that's where, let's go ahead and pop that chart up here. So now all of a sudden we're talking about the key stakeholders by name. Person X, person Y, person Z. Where are they on this? Oh, I'm opposed to it. I may not even know about it, but if I did know about it, oh, that sucks. At P&G, a lot of times, if I didn't work this in advance, the senior product supply leaders would be against me. Why? Because any change is a risk to their plant running efficiently. Because their plant is 100% designed to produce today's product 100% of the time. They'll tell you, we don't just produce it 100%, we produce it 110%. No, they would probably never say that. But, the point being, any change. So if it's somebody who's operational, they're probably going to be hindered. Then let's keep going with my P&G example. There's the head of the company, was David Taylor at the end of my time. He doesn't know anything about it. He's probably in the do nothing camp. Then there's my boss. Well, if I'm doing my job right, they'll help make it happen. But what if it doesn't make them look like the next person to be promoted? They could be back over here. So this is a very real world behavioral psychology, applied behavioral psychology kind of chart. And it pays to understand this and fill this out for every single innovation that's out there, to go down and literally name names. If you don't know names, say the person in this office is probably most likely. And then you figure out, all right, so once you find out where everybody stands, the next step of analysis is to say, who, let's say my boss is here, right? Well, I got to move her to at least here and preferably here.
Our final interview of the year came from the founder of L3 Leadership and the director of the Light of Life Rescue Mission in Pittsburgh, Doug Smith. He was able to share his opinions and thoughts about how to maintain harmony when you have several different things going on in your life.
How hard is it to juggle those two different things? A lot of people out there are thinking about starting their own business, whether it's in leadership or whatever the case may be, but they don't quite have the means or maybe not the time to do so yet, or they're hesitant just because of the demands that it may take, but they still have a family and bills to pay, things like that. So how do you manage keeping that harmony between the two jobs and a home life, right? I don't like to call it balance because I don't think there's any such thing as balance.
Right.
But how do you maintain that harmony between those?
Yeah. So I think one, you have to look at what season of life that you're in. So I would say that in the beginning, Jeremy, we were just talking about this, how, you're just starting off and you're editing your own podcast. And man, I remember that season. I don't even know. I think I edited my own podcast for like 7 years, which is a long time. But, when I first started the podcast and started L3, my wife and I didn't have kids. And so, we'd work and, we'd have dinner together, and then I could basically just hustle all night and just work on L3, and I would go hard. But then we started having kids, and I remember mentors telling me like, hey, you're going to start to have kids now. I don't know if you're going to be able to do both. And at first, my attitude was like, well, watch this. You don't know me. You might not have the capacity to do it, but I do. That was my attitude. But I would just say that once I got into a season that it wasn't sustainable for me to do both at the level I was doing it, because I had children, and my wife and I do try to protect our evenings. Like I don't actually do barely any L3 work now throughout the week. Saturday's kind of my day. I put a few hours in. And how I've had to grow as a leader is I've had to develop L3 to a place where I could actually hire a team, because I know I'm not supposed to do this full time, but I do know that the things we're doing make a significant impact, and I don't want to lose the momentum that we have with those things. And so Dan Sullivan wrote a great book that I'd recommend that everyone reads. It's called Who Not How. And the whole principle is, oftentimes as entrepreneurs, or when we're starting a side hustle or even just starting our own business, we ask how. Like you're asking, man, Doug, how do you balance all of this? Like, how do you do the podcast, and how do you do mastermind groups, and how do you do a one-day conference? And he said, the question you should be asking isn't how. And if you found something that you can't do, that you can't figure out the how, the answer isn't a how, the answer is a who. And so the reality is there's someone out there that has that skill set, or that has that passion, that can do it way better than you can do. And so you need to hire that person. Now, in the beginning, and it's not like L3 is making all this money on the side for me now, but in the beginning, I had no money. And the season that I was in, I needed who's to help me. And so I really, even though we are an LLC, I recruited people who are passionate about leadership development and developed teams of volunteers that could help run the breakfast, that could help manage everything, because I couldn't. Now we are in a place where I would say you should, especially if it's a side business, you do need to figure out how to monetize your business, especially if you want to do it full time. For me, I need funding for L3 to keep it going by hiring people. And so now we have an executive assistant, Ashley, who does all of my email and calendar and podcast scheduling and logistics. We have a team that runs and produces our podcast for us. So outside of having the podcast conversations and basically casting vision and selling it to people, I don't really have to do anything with L3. And then so that's how I balance it. I've had to hire people to help balance it.
So what an awesome year it was. You guys just heard the best of a lot of the interviews that we had. People like Pastor Joby Martin, Doug Smith, Laura Thale, Rob Olson, Kyle Creighton. They were all so gracious to be on the show, and we learned so much from them, and we can't thank them enough for all that they contributed to this year's podcast. Again, thank you guys for listening. Thank all the guests for being on here. But hey, we're excited. Not only do we wrap up our first year, we're excited to make an announcement that we will be rebranding our podcast. Nothing's going to change. You're going to get the same great content, but as with anything, you're in a constant mode of reflection, change, shifting, making sure you're reaching the audience that you need to reach. And so we're going to rebrand the podcast. We're walking away from Mullins Muster. It will now be referred to as the Humble Leader Podcast. You guys will have to do nothing on your end. Keep subscribing to the same channel that you always have, and it'll pop up in your library, within your feed, on whatever podcast platform you listen to, but it'll pop up as the Humble Leader Podcast and no longer be the Mullins Muster. In full disclosure, we're going to take a couple months off. We need to, as we handle some things both personally and professionally, and be able to get after some of these goals. You'll see us back in the May or June timeframe of this year, but don't give up on us. I promise we will be back. We just need the time to make sure we're organized properly. So we thank you for all your support. If you need anything at all from us, feel free to hit us up. Check us out on humbleleaderdevelopment.com. Check us out on all of our social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Humble Leader Development. We'll be happy to engage with anything you'd like to talk about. And then finally, we're going to leave off with the Bible verse, just as we always do. And today's Bible verse comes from Psalm 118:24, and it says, "This is a day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it." Let's be glad in it. Thank you guys so much once again for a great year, and I'm so excited for what's to come. See you guys later.